Hello and welcome to Clock Strikes Midnight. In this episode, we're digging into the legend of the Missouri Goatman. 3 different stories from across the state that tie together to tell the twisted tale of an animal-human hybrid with evil intentions. Prepare for a journey into the dark. The legend of the satyr dates back to ancient Greece, similar to that of the faun from the Roman culture. In fact, Pan, the Greek god of the wild, is commonly depicted as a half-man, half-goat. These human-horse-goat hybrids, with body parts from each animal, are known for their trickster-like behavior. The horned guardians of the wood have long been told of in folklore and tall tales. But they don't just live in ancient stories. No, creatures like these are being sighted in modern times. One current version of the satyr is the Goatman. Much more of a monster than a mischievous forest guide, the Goatman is seen around graveyards and bridges, sometimes carrying an axe. Urban legends surrounding the Goatman exist all across the country. Stranger yet, these abominations are said to stalk the forests of Missouri. Sightings of the Goatman date back to the 1800s. In fact, one particular story from the farmlands of southwest Missouri stands out. A tale of theft, murder, and revenge from the dead. The legend of the Goatman of Hawkins Ford. It all begins in the late 1800s on a farm outside of the settlement of Fordland. One day, while checking their livestock, a farmer and his son noticed they were missing several head of cattle. Suspecting a thief or a predator, the family began keeping a closer eye on their animals. One evening, they heard a goat acting up. Suspecting foul play, they decided it was time to solve their little problem. The farmer and his son, armed with a shotgun, ran to shoot whatever was causing the ruckus. What they assumed was probably a coyote. As soon as they saw movement, the son pulled the trigger and dropped the culprit from a distance. When the farmer and his son approached their kill, they were horrified. The now dead cattle thief was actually the local hermit. The son had blown the poor man's head almost completely off. The farmer and his son acted quickly, not wanting to face the consequences of their murder. Even if the man was stealing their cattle, they knew they would surely face some punishment for blowing the old man to smithereens. They took the body to the woods and buried it where no one would ever find it, promising to keep the secret to themselves. It was shortly after this that the family began hearing strange and terrifying noises on the farm. Screams of an abomination in the night. Eventually, they began finding their cattle decapitated and mutilated. Goats' heads cut off and their bodies dismembered. The terror got the better of the family, and they eventually fled to Kansas. From then on, people in the area have seen a goat-headed man stalking the forests. Like many Goatman legends, he's said to carry an axe, which he would theoretically use to decapitate his animal victims. Yes, this axe-wielding mutation is supposedly out there prowling the woods around Hawkins Ford. Or was it Fordland? Because there is no settlement of Hawkins Ford in the area. But there is a Fordland, and there is a Hawkins Ford Bridge south of Nixa, but that's 30 miles from the town of Fordland. Could people be tying this Goatman in with the Hawkins Ford Bridge to better fit the urban legend? After all, Goatman is associated with bridges, including Kentucky's Pope Lick Monster and the infamous Goatman's Bridge in Texas. Which brings us to our next stop, the Devil's Elbow. Yet another crossing in Goatman's stomping grounds. The Devil's Elbow Bridge spans over the Big Piney River and is the way in and out of Devil's Elbow, our headquarters for part of this investigation. A hidden gem, this little town is home to legends of its own, including the ghost of a wailing woman in the woods and heads that supposedly bob in the waters of the Big Piney before submerging, never to be seen again. We chose Devil's Elbow because it sits between St. James, Missouri, home to Goatman's graveyard, and because it's near Fort Leonard Wood, site of a reported Goatman attack on soldiers in the forest. This is the story of the Goatman of Fort Leonard Wood. This report comes from a green text story posted on the website 4chan in 2013. The setting is Fort Leonard Wood, an army training installation in the Ozark Mountains. Two soldiers are on watch one cold, snowy night, keeping an eye on the tents of the other campers involved in the training exercise, doing their best to keep warm and awake when one of them begins to hear something. He alerts his partner to the noise of leaves and snow crunching. Thinking it was a superior coming to check on them, they were terrified when they saw the shadow of what was making the noises. Evidently, the shadow figure was nearly 7 feet tall and had horns on its head. They watch as the figure opens a tent and peeks inside. At this point, the soldiers on watch are freaking out. The superior officers arrive suddenly, scaring the watch party. Just then, they all hear a loud grunt. When they turn to look back toward the figure, they see that it's holding a female private by the leg, dragging her from her tent. After an intense stare down with the creature, one drill sergeant lets out a battle cry and runs screaming toward the monster. The rest of her crew follow suit and charge the Goatman as it releases the private and runs off into the woods. A perimeter was quickly put up, and everybody is armed and scared. When the chase party returned, they said the creature had gotten away in the brush after crossing a creek. The female private, who was almost taken, came to and said that all she remembered was being smothered by the creature until she passed out. Another report from the same year comes from Fort Leonard Wood. While doing firearms training in the dead of winter, a group of soldiers in a lookout tower are startled when two men carrying another man come running out of the woods, screaming bloody murder. When the soldiers get to the panicked men, they see that the one being carried has a branch stabbed straight through his leg, and he's screaming, warning everyone that the deer man is out there. In a strange twist, there is an all-white, deer-headed cryptid that lives in Missouri and Arkansas folklore, the Snoffus. And even more strange, the antlers of the Snoffus are said to be branches. According to the Ozark legend, an encounter with the Snoffus is a bad omen and could be a sign of imminent death. Back at the campsite, we had told ourselves enough campfire stories to get spooked. We watched the fog from the river drift around the streetlights of the campsite, when suddenly we saw something moving in the shadows. A trick of the eye? No. We saw it again, and this time it was moving closer. Startled, we quickly jumped into our vehicle and locked the doors, armed with pistols in case the Goatman was stalking. We watched the fog in our campsite from the car, waiting for the creature to come into view. And it did. But it ended up being the camp owner's friendly and curious German Shepherd. A lesson in just how big myths and legends can grow in your mind. Thankfully, we weren't bum-rushed by a Goatman, but our journey wasn't complete. We still had one more place to visit on the trail of the horned creature from the woods. The end of the line, Goatman's grave. And so, we packed our bags and headed over to the St. James area in search of Goatman's grave and the legendary Spook Hollow. Headed south out of the town of St. James is County Road 3450, better known to most as Spook Hollow Road. This notorious stretch of blacktop into gravel is thick with scary legends and creepy lore. Much of it is centered around the graveyard at the dead end of the road. Pine Hill Cemetery also known as Goatman's Grave or Goatman's Graveyard, is said to be home to satanic cult ceremonies that worship or conjure the horned entity of the forest. Cloaked figures are reportedly seen wandering the forests, keeping trespassers at bay and warning those who try to interfere with their ceremonies to stay away or else. While we couldn't find any evidence of a satanic cult in Spook Hollow, there is in fact a real cult that lived on the same road, outfitted with an eccentric leader, as most cults are. Joseph Jeffers was a self-proclaimed prophet who called himself the Messiah of the Yahweh. Jeffers would prey on rich widows, moving them to his compound, Yahweh City, and tapping into their inheritances and life savings to use at his leisure. He even used the widow's money to build a near 30-foot high, shiny golden pyramid, his temple of Yehoshua, as a house of worship. Jeffers preached of the end times, warning of a UFO fleet that was going to come and wipe out the world with nuclear weapons. And the only way to be saved from this? Well, by worshiping and receiving the blessing of Joseph Jeffers, of course. Jeffers was once arrested for charges relating to sexual misconduct. One of his wives was mysteriously raped and killed, and at least one of the widows that gave their money to Jeffers also died shortly after associating themselves with the man. So, if the Goatman isn't who the cults are worshipping out in Spook Hollow, then what would the creature be doing out there? Could it have something to do with the old bus that sits in the woods just off of Spook Hollow Road? One story says that the bus crashed on the road, swerving to avoid the shadow of the Goatman. The bus driver and all 20 children aboard are said to have perished. Other legends say that the old bus is inhabited by a hermit who lives there to protect the Goatman's grave, shooting at any potential trespassers. It's said that if you stare long enough at the old trolley, you will start to see eyes appear, like children on the bus looking out. Maybe they're the victims of the Goatman, trapped on the bus after their death. Or perhaps the hermit himself was some kind of soul keeper. There are other strange stories up and down Spook Hollow Road. The trail out to Goatman's grave. This old stone wall on Spook Hollow is labeled the Witch's Wall by some. Others report seeing spirits of a mother and her children dressed in old-time clothes. People say they've been run off the road by a deranged driver coming out of Spook Hollow. When the smoke settles and they look to see who it was, there's no car or lights in sight. At the end of Spook Hollow Road sits Goatman's grave, known by its actual name as Pine Hill Cemetery. Each time we visited Pine Hill, we couldn't help but notice the blatant vandalism and disrespect for the dead. Many of the tombstones tipped, cracked, broken and crumbled at the hands of careless vandals. It could be because the cemetery is located at the dead end of a rural county road, or perhaps the infamy of this place, being the eternal resting place to Goatman, makes it a target for destruction. The Goatman buried here is rumored to have been born to a witch of a mother. She is also said to be laid to rest here, or is she merely sleeping? The supposed witch's headstone is engraved with the phrase, "She is not dead, but sleepeth." Many interpret this as some sort of devilish or satanic phrase referencing a witch who lives on in the afterlife. In all actuality, the phrase is rooted in the Christian religion and refers to the physical body lying in rest or sleep after death until they are raised to heaven by God or Jesus. The Goatman himself is said to be buried here in an unmarked grave. Interestingly, the woman who some claim to be a witch does have a young son buried in an unmarked grave here. Many of the tales say that the Goatman's body lies underneath one of these rock-pile tombs. Other versions of the story say that the Goatman's grave is off in the woods, marked only by a single uncarved stone. Paranormal investigators who have traveled here report issues with their electronic equipment, batteries dying, audio and video devices malfunctioning. During our investigation, we played into the legend and attempted to communicate with the Goatman to see if some trace of his spirit still lingered. We employed a spirit box, EMF detector, and a new tool developed by our team member, Oren Kirchhoff. Oren programmed the KTE, the Kirchhoff Terminology Experiment, which is essentially a random word generator, and we set it to run while we asked the Goatman a series of questions. Their responses were strange indeed. Random words like gelato and raunchy were humorous, words like pastorless and earthman striking our curiosity. The spirit box was active as well, but it was hard to decipher what exactly it was trying to say. It was almost as if the signal was delayed, like it would wait until we were asking a second question to respond to the first one, like two people talking over one another in a virtual meeting. In an interesting twist, and a tie-in with another haunted graveyard, Levi Snelson, the man who built the nearby Snelson Brinker cabin, is buried here. We covered the haunted grounds of the Snelson Brinker cabin and the Houston Brinker graveyard on our sister series, Grave Yarns, earlier this year. Before we journeyed out of Pine Hill Cemetery, we couldn't help but notice the large circle of sticks and branches that someone had made and left. It was difficult to see this as anything other than dark and mysterious. Wooden circles like this one are often associated with rituals and conjurations in the forest. Could there really be a cult out there, calling through the void to summon a half-man, half-goat monstrosity into our reality? People have reported seeing unexplained hoof prints out there, and sounds of large animals, or something, stalking them in the surrounding woods. Or could it all be a ruse? Someone playing on the heightened sense of fear from visitors to a supposedly cursed place? A prankster or trickster, much like the Goatmen of ancient times. Questions remain. What is the horned creature that people are seeing in the woods, and what is going on down in Spook Hollow? And could it all be related? The answers are out there. How far are you willing to go to find them?